Oof, the mental load of neurodivergent parenting. We often mention that mental load is even greater for primary parents of neurodivergent kids.
And it is.
Yeah, for sure. To be clear, the mental load for primary parents of non neurodivergent kids is definitely a lot too. There's no two ways around it, but it is different and more for parents of neurodivergent kids. And we talk about that a lot. Like we mention it, but we have not really taking the time to unpack that, like what it means, what causes it, what it looks like. So I thought today we could really get into it. But before we do that, like what exactly is mental load?
Yeah. So mental load, sometimes called cognitive labor, is all the invisible labor, the emotional labor, the unpaid work that largely occurs in our brains or maybe, on our phones or computers that's often unseen and sometimes not really understood or appreciated by others. They don't know what's happening.
Yes, exactly. An example that I think about this is you have something on the surface. It's like your kid needs a new pair of pants. And what we see is a parent going into a store and just buying a pair of pants. But what we don't notice or don't really see is that someone needed to actually one notice that there was an old pair of pants and that they were worn out or they were too small or whatever, and then they had to figure out what size to buy and what brand to buy. Then top of that, you're thinking, and you have a neurodivergent kid, they might have some specificity around texture or what type of band that they want, or like, do they want a zip up or can't, or do they need a button, or do they want elastic, or do they not want elastic? And trying to kind of like plan through all of that.
Right. That's a lot. And then if you multiply that across a household, every small thing with a million little pieces becomes a constant mental churn in the brain.
Yes, absolutely. And it just keeps stacking, and there's
Yeah.
more and more things to think about. Yeah, so today let's talk about mental load, parenting neurodivergent kids, why it is greater, what it looks like, what it feels like, and what we can do to support. Welcome to Parenting Neurodivergent Humans. I'm Dr. Morgan Beidelman. I am a clinical psychologist, former school psych, former teacher, neurodivergent myself, and parent to two humans, one of whom is neurodivergent.
And I'm Breann Colpitz. I'm a school psychologist turned social coach for twice exceptional kids. I'm a mom to a couple neurodivergent kids and a late realized ADHD human, which means I'm double blessed with autism and ADHD. Thanks for being here. We're so glad you're here.
So, first, I want to say I said this earlier, but I just want to reiterate it. Parenting is a lot of mental load for all parents of all children, period, full stop. Most parents in our society do not get enough support. One parent, often a mother, if there is a mother in that household, is often shouldering a lot of that, but is not always the case. But in many cases, it is. And they are shouldering a lot of responsibility around planning and researching and scheduling and organizing. And that's like before the child is actually in front of them and they're taking care of the child and doing the transportation and the cleaning and all the things that like actually in the moment sustain and keep that person alive or those other small people alive. That is happening for every single parent all the time. But then when we have parents of neurodivergent kids, there's all of these other invisible tasks, this other invisible labor that goes into providing strong care, strong advocacy, and strong support for neurodivergent kids.
Yep, exactly. I'm just nodding away over here so hard that I feel like my neck's probably going to be sore after this. But yeah, the mental load is a lot for everybody. We acknowledge that. And then for those of us raising neurodivergent kids and who also might have the additional layer of being neurodivergent ourselves, yeah, look out. So, why is the mental load greater for parents of neurodivergent kids? We've thought through some reasons, we put them into categories. So, let's go through that stuff. So, first, we have the extra direct stuff. So, this would be like specialists, assessments,
Mhm.
therapies. You got your school communication that's probably happening more often. Maybe you have a back and forth notebook or a check in, check out system for your kid. And so you're getting more communication from the school. Perhaps you're attending IEP meetings or 504 meetings. And so you're keeping track of that, organizing that communication, staying on top of it, even within that, so many layers. Then there's the financial burden created by these things. Assessments and therapies, often not covered by insurance. So figuring that out.
Or if it is covered by insurance, managing
Yeah,
insurance, which could be a whole
right.
full-time job.
Yep, the claims, making sure maybe your HSA reimbursement went through or whatever that is, or getting the receipts so that you can try to get reimbursed if that is your situation. Then maybe you have tutoring or sensory tools, trying, buying things that end up not working, researching all the things and trying to figure out what is this material made out of? Will it give my kid a rash? Is it going to work? And then trying the thing and then teaching the thing, like how we've talked about how to teach to use fidgets or any of that. Just like so much goes on with the time and logistics of these extra pieces. And it might require taking time off work to bring kids to therapies, appointments, time for school meetings, time home for sickness or suspensions, and then potentially finding care for other kids if you got multiple kids at home.
Absolutely. And those are the things that we see from the outside, right? And then there's this whole other layer of stuff that's happening even more so behind the scenes. And that can be things, and you kind of alluded to this too, but it can be the research, the planning, the maybes and the what ifs, and these, what I call or think of as like mental rehearsals, where you're just thinking through all of these things that could or often happen in different situations. I was on a consult the other day and we were talking about somebody who was getting prepared to drive. It was two therapists that are serving this family and the parents. And we're talking through all of these additional logistics for a teenager who's getting ready to drive. And we're like, okay, what does this person need to know? And there was so many additional thought processes that went into it. Like, do we need to help make sure that they understand the unwritten rules of the road or the nonverbal communication that happens on the road, where you have the actual rule of law and then you have what the other person is doing, and being
Right.
able to shift and manage both of those things. And what was so evident in that conversation is that like these parents had spent so long worried about this, thinking about it, wondering what to do, not knowing, wanting to give their child agency and independence and autonomy, and also wanting to do it in a way that actually supported them being able to keep that agency and autonomy and independence. And there were layers upon layers that nobody would know if they were not privy to that conversation that we were having together.
Yeah.
And it doesn't stop there. It can be researching parenting strategies. It can be trying to find a school that's the right fit, figuring out what the sensory needs might be, having a backup plan for your backup plan, a
Yep.
backup plan if the food doesn't work well, a backup plan if you are in some place that your child has a meltdown, a backup plan if the clothes are somehow like expiring, which is what I call it when suddenly you're like, and I cannot wear this another moment.
Right.
you know?
Right. Yeah.
And
It's
those
a
things
lot.
are really, really real and they're exhausting.
Yeah, like the backup plan, I'm thinking about like having the safe foods and the same foods on hand and or refilling the meds. I don't know, just all of it. It's yeah, it's just not visible. So you wouldn't necessarily know it's there.
Yes. And it made me think of something else as we're just talking, especially if you're neurodivergent yourself. But really, I would imagine that this is probably true for most parents, especially given everybody's expectations of parents these days. I think we are expecting them to be like, they have to
Yeah.
be beyond perfect. But
Superhumans.
yeah, super. Thank you. The thing that I'm thinking of is when I see for neurodivergent parents, neurodivergent kids, where all of this mental load is exhausting. And then at some point, you do something, you say something, you behave in this way that is incongruent with your value system. You yell at your kid, or you don't, you remove yourself. I have a friend who just wrote to me and she was like, I realized that I get off of work a day earlier than my kids. And I am so excited to lay in my bed and watch Gilmore Girls all day. And then immediately her next thought was, I'm a horrible parent. I feel so guilty, da 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 da. That's related to this kind of like feeling bad about like needing that self-care time. But I think because that mental load is so high, she is neurodivergent and has two neurodivergent kids. That mental load is so high at points, like all humans, we tend to either snap behave in a way that's incongruent with our value system, or we remove ourselves so that we don't snap and then we feel guilty about it, which ironically then increases our mental load again because
Right.
then we end up in this rumination pattern where we're just thinking and thinking and thinking about what we did or didn't do, either for ourselves or for our children.
Yeah, and I think this goes hand in hand with just like a category of the emotional toll of all of this, which is what you're saying, which is often amplified by not feeling like other adults in your life really get it or understand what's going on when it comes to parenting your neurodivergent kids. So perhaps, you're feeling alone, you're feeling like you can't get advice or vent to others because they have a really different experience than you. And that can even happen within partnerships and relationships with co-parents between a primary parent and, I guess secondary parent. What's the word for that? But just, the one who's like picking up the kids from school and whatever, you might need to vent and you got to feel safe to be able to do that. And so then there's the mental load of like, can I say my real feelings? Can I really 100% vent about this thing? And then, there's more in that bucket of the emotional toll, feeling like you constantly need to explain everything, your kid, their needs, what works, what doesn't. I recently got a text from a friend who was like, "Hey, can I vent to you about grandparents not understanding neurodivergent needs and stuff?" And so I think, figuring out who can you vent to? Like who's a safe person to talk to? Do I even have that? Then like managing your own feelings and expectations around your thoughts that you're having, around juggling all of this mental load. So, yeah, it's a
Yes.
lot. It's a lot.
It is a lot. It's so exhausting. And I think it's not only okay for us to recognize that, but important for us to recognize it. We don't want to gaslight ourselves. It feels hard because it is hard, you know?
So hard.
Um, yeah, it's so hard. And there are things that we can do to manage it and hopefully make it easier. And I know that we've gotten more into this in some other episodes. So if you haven't, I would definitely maybe consider going back to another one of our episodes. We did one on self-care for parents of neurodivergent kids, and I think that could be a really good one to listen to for more resources. But I think we should definitely probably highlight a couple of tools here.
Nope,
And
nope. Let's just rant. Let's just rant and then we're out. Bye, everybody.
yeah, rant, mic drop, and it's
See you next
hard.
week.
It's hard.
Okay, so let's talk about a couple resources. What do you got?
Yeah, yeah. First of all, I would say not to beat a dead drum. Nope, that's not the analogy. Whatever, not
Yeah.
to whatever it is. Something about a drum, but building community. And I think, there's a couple of ways to think about community. There's definitely the one that I think is the easiest for us to think about, which is building a community. Easy might not be the right word. The one that comes to mind first is building community of other parents who have neurodivergent children as well, and might air quotes here, but get it, even if they don't get your exact situation, getting the plethora of situations that that come with neurodivergent parenting. But I want to also encourage people that if that's not accessible to you, you don't feel like you have one that you can tap into where you live. First of all, one of the good sides of the internet is the opportunity to find some of those spaces in the virtual landscape. And I would definitely encourage you to do that, especially if you feel like you don't have one local that you can tap into, or you're just not feeling comfortable in that space yet. But the other way that you can build community, in my opinion, is to actually tap back into yourself. And you're like, what are some other things other than this identity of being a parent and like, all that comes with that, the good and the hard? What are some other parts about me? Like maybe I'm a golfer. Maybe I, used to play baseball. Maybe I was a gardener. Maybe there's these other parts of me and I can tap into community there. And that can be this place that I kind of like come back into myself, it pours into myself so that when I come back to my parenting role, I have a little bit more bandwidth, energy, etc., to kind of do that.
Yeah, more resourced.
Yeah.
I'm gonna shout myself out here real quick, but I do have a free private Facebook group that could be a good place to build that
Wonderful
online
thing.
community.
Yes.
Yeah. So check the show notes for that because we actually are talking about the mental load over there. So
That's
join
awesome.
us. Another idea is to try to, if this works for you, to be able to build a safety net and take breaks where possible. So that could mean finding a babysitter or a
Mhm.
house cleaner if you have the resources to do that, to build in small breaks. One thing, if you're like, okay, how am I going to find a babysitter? Can't just go on care.com. Like, that's not going to work. Can you do a trade with a neighbor, or do you have family around? Are there support folks at school who also do babysitting? That is sometimes a thing that happens. So, is there somebody at your school who knows your kid who you would trust to watch them for a bit so you could get a break? It might look like getting some paper plates out on Friday night or Monday night or whatever night. And
All nights.
yeah, any and all nights. Putting an extra freezer meal to have for a hard day, bringing your headphones to the playground and listening to something while your kids are playing, and or, just screaming in a pillow.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Fed is fed. So
Right.
whatever that looks like is more than fine. You're doing a great job. There's other little things, and this is definitely not from me, so I want to give credit where credit is due. I think I've mentioned her before. I know I have actually. A lot of her content and her book resonate with me, which is Casey Davis. KC Davis. I think the book is like How to Keep House When You're Drowning. She is neurodivergent and she talks about that, and she has some really great practical tips, and one comes to mind, and like I don't even have school-aged children in the house, but she has this one where she's like, just empty the dishwasher enough to reload a couple of things if that's what you need. I mean, I know that sounds kind of silly and some people might poo-poo that, but to me I was like, that is brilliant, because I tend to have this all or nothing thinking, and I think a lot of us do. And especially as parents, we're like, I'm going to do all the things or I'm terrible at it. And and the perception is I do nothing, even though, of course, like no parent is doing nothing. And if I'm like looking at some dishes and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to put two of these away and then I'm going to put two dirty ones in here. And if I rewash it and half of it was clean already, is that the end of the world? Nope. You're doing just fine.
It's a good strategy. I also have seen people say, run the dishwasher twice. If you don't have the stamina or the bandwidth to like get everything all rinsed and whatever before you run it, then maybe you have to run it a couple times. And apologies to all our environmentalists listening, but that's, surviving. And that's what we have to refocus. It's like we've talked before about, is it functional? And I think that's the question, right?
Yeah, it also makes me think about like things that can reduce your mental load. And I'm like off of our notes, but who is it? I'm gonna butcher the name of it. But anyways, there's two moms. They're actually here in Colorado. They have little small humans.
Oh, big little
Thank
feelings.
you.
Yep.
Thank you. And I was like, I can see them perfectly. They have a podcast. They're lovely. But one of them wears like the exact same outfit. Deanna wears the exact same, like she talks about it being her uniform, like every day, like black leggings. And there's a real value in that. It's like you don't have, there's no mental load there. I have 7 pairs of the exact same pants. And I think that it falls kind of in line with that, right? Like, where can we take expectations off of ourselves?
Yeah. Letting go of the shoulds. I think, we talk about that all the time, but it's a game changer. You have to let go of the shoulds. Your family's different. So do what works for you. And that
They don't
is,
have to bathe every day. They can
yeah.
eat the same foods on repeat. If
Yep.
they want to wear socks, they don't want to wear socks. If they're not going to wear a sweater, they're not going to wear a sweater. It might actually even make your relationships stronger, happier, and healthier, quite honestly. And if it works for you, it works, as we've said.
Right. Yep. So, lastly, I'd say let's think about the division of labor in your household. If there are multiple people in which you can divide labor, can you take shifts to help reduce stress on the primary parent? We mentioned before, if you're looking for support around dividing up the mental load, you can check out Fair Play Life. The Fair Play method it's great. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes. So yeah, thanks for listening. We will be back with another new episode out next week. We'll be talking about gatherings, travel, and holidays with neurodivergent humans. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it.
Yes. And before you go, I just want to give another shout out to Breann. She has a new session of her parenting group starting in January. So if you are looking for some awesome support and to build community, her groups can be an amazing way to do that. We put a link in the show notes. So if you want to check it out.
Thank you. As always, if you have a question or topic you want us to cover, send us a note. You can message us on Instagram or use the Google form that you'll find in the show notes.
If we are a good fit for you, join our communities, please. We would love to have you. You can find us on Instagram. Dr. Morgan, me, is Dr. Morgan Beitelman, and Breann is it's Breann Kulpitz.
And if you are enjoying the podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. That helps so much. It is a gift to us and it helps the podcast be pushed out to other folks. Thank you to our editor and producer, Erica Carpenter. We appreciate you so much.
Thanks for joining us. See you next week.
Bye.
I just keep envisioning this like little guy on a surfboard going, woo!
I'm going to try to not think about that the whole time, and that's going to be hard.
Just a quick disclosure, this podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute a psychological client relationship and should not be used in place of expert evaluation or therapy.
I just want to make an official announcement that I'm going to try to say yep less times in this episode.